For most of modern history, people were taught to believe in a simple economic idea. Free markets decide prices. Buyers and sellers meet, supply meets demand, competition keeps things fair, and prices reflect reality. That was the myth we grew up with, a clean, rational system where markets acted like truth tellers. But today, that truth has collapsed. Prices no longer communicate anything real. Instead, they are shaped, manipulated, inflated, and engineered by forces far larger than supply and demand. Think about housing prices, energy prices, food prices, or even the cost of everyday essentials. Are they rising because demand suddenly exploded? Because supply suddenly vanished? Not usually. Instead, prices are driven by corporate monopolies, government policy tools, speculative investors, and algorithmic trading systems. The market is no longer a natural ecosystem. It's a controlled environment, managed by a small number of powerful players who decide what everything should cost. Free markets die quietly. There is no announcement, no catastrophe, no ceremony. They simply stop working as intended. Prices stop acting like signals and start acting like weapons. Price discovery, the core function of a market, gets replaced by price engineering. Instead of markets responding to reality, they respond to interest rates, political narratives, money printing, and financial engineering. Today's markets are not places where value is discovered. They are places where value is manufactured. The system rewards manipulation, not efficiency, speculation, not productivity. And the ordinary consumer, who still believes prices reflect truth, ends up trapped in a world where everything costs more for reasons they cannot see, because the market they imagine no longer exists. The free market hasn't just weakened, it has been replaced. For decades, we were taught that free markets thrive on competition, that countless companies battle to offer the best products at the lowest prices, and consumers, armed with choice, ultimately decide the winners. But in today's world, that picture has quietly dissolved. Real competition is disappearing, not because consumers stopped caring, but because industries themselves have consolidated into a handful of dominant giants. What looks like a crowded marketplace is often nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. Across sectors, a pattern repeats. A few megacorporations either swallow smaller rivals or buy minority stakes in them. That means even when you see 5 different brands on a shelf, they may all belong to the same parent company. In tech, for companies dominate how we communicate, shop, store information, and consume entertainment. In banking, a handful of institutions control most flows of capital. Even agriculture, once fiercely competitive, is now ruled by a few giant seed, fertilizer, and distribution corporations. This collapse of true competition means prices are no longer shaped by market forces. They are shaped by agreements, algorithms, and silent alignments between companies that no longer need to fight one another. Prices rise not because costs rise, but because no competitor challenges them. Quality stagnates because consumers have nowhere else to go. And innovation slows down because the giants controlling the system focus more on protecting their dominance than creating breakthroughs. Governments, once the watchdogs of competition, now struggle to regulate corporations that are larger, richer, and more globally integrated than many countries themselves. The result is a marketplace that still looks busy, loud, and diverse, but underneath, it is quietly coordinated, predictable, and controlled. The free market hasn't disappeared in name. It has disappeared in function. In a healthy free market, prices act like the nervous system of the economy. They transmit information, scarcity, demand, innovation, competition. When prices rise, they signal producers to create more. When prices fall, they signal consumers to buy more. It's an elegant, self-balancing mechanism that has worked for centuries. But today, that mechanism is being overridden, manipulated, and weaponized, not by markets, but by governments and powerful institutions that use prices as political tools rather than economic truths. Across the world, governments intervene in pricing to shape public perception, maintain political power, or win elections. Fuel prices are capped before voting seasons. Food prices are subsidized to avoid riots. Interest rates are suppressed to keep the illusion of prosperity alive. In such an environment, prices stop being reflections of reality and start becoming instruments of control. But the story doesn't end there. Large corporations, too, manipulate prices, using monopolistic power, algorithmic pricing, and supply chain dominance to manufacture artificial scarcity or inflate profits. When a handful of companies control entire sectors, the price you pay is no longer determined by competition, but by strategic corporate decision-making. The result is an economy where the numbers you see, gas prices, interest rates, rent, groceries, don't tell the truth about supply and demand. Instead, they reveal who holds the power to shape the narrative. If governments want stability, they freeze prices. If corporates want higher margins, they raise them in coordinated silence. If central banks want growth, they distort cost of borrowing. This isn't a free market. It's a managed illusion. And when prices no longer communicate real economic conditions, society loses its most critical tool for understanding what's actually happening. The economy becomes a fog, dense, confusing, and increasingly dangerous. For most people, markets still feel like legitimate battlegrounds, where companies fight for customers, where innovation wins, and where prices reflect real competition. But if you look closely, especially over the last decade, you'll notice something unsettling. The number of choices is exploding while the number of actual decision-makers is shrinking. Competition has become an illusion, a carefully engineered theater designed to maintain the appearance of freedom while consolidating power behind a curtain. Think about the supermarket aisle. You see dozens of cereal brands, snack labels, juice varieties, and household goods, each trying to look distinct. Yet nearly all of them belong to just a handful of giant conglomerates, companies powerful enough to set prices industry-wide. The competition you think exists is really just one corporate empire wearing different masks. The same pattern dominates digital markets. You may believe you're choosing between competing apps, platforms, or services, but the data, infrastructure, and revenue streams are ultimately controlled by a tiny group of megafirms. These companies set algorithmic prices, remove traditional bidding wars, and manipulate demand through predictive analytics. Consumers feel empowered, but the outcomes are predetermined. Even banks and financial institutions operate under this illusion. Interest rates, loan terms, and investment options may appear different on paper, yet almost all of them shadow the same central policies set by national banks and global financial institutions. Prices move not because of competition, but because of coordination, legal or otherwise. This illusion is vital for maintaining public belief in free markets. If consumers realized how few entities control their choices, trust would collapse overnight. And without trust, the entire market system would destabilize. In a world where everything looks competitive but isn't, the free market becomes just another narrative, useful, comforting, and entirely disconnected from reality. When prices no longer represent the real value of goods, services, or labor, an entire society begins to operate inside an economic illusion. This illusion can hold for a while, sometimes even years, but eventually it fractures, because a price system that is disconnected from reality cannot guide rational decisions, investments, or policies. And that's where the world is heading. Imagine trying to build a house when the measuring tape keeps changing length every few minutes. That is what happens when price signals become distorted. Businesses can't plan, consumers can't budget, investors can't calculate risk, and governments can't predict outcomes. Everything becomes guesswork. In this new reality, survival depends not on understanding markets, but on understanding who controls the levers of price manipulation. The winners are no longer innovators or efficient producers. They are insiders who benefit from artificially inflated assets, subsidized industries, and protected monopolies. The losers are ordinary citizens whose savings shrink, whose wages stagnate, and whose cost of living rises faster than they can adapt. As prices increasingly detach from fundamentals, societies drift toward two dangerous outcomes: shortages and excesses. Shortages arise when regulated or artificially suppressed prices make production unprofitable. Excesses appear when cheap credit encourages reckless speculation, creating bubbles in housing, stocks, energy, even basic food. Ultimately, when prices stop meaning anything, trust collapses. People stop believing official data, government reports, or corporate statements. A shadow economy emerges, one where real value is negotiated informally, privately, and outside the official system. This is the future that awaits a world where free markets die. It is not chaos overnight. but a slow erosion of economic truth until society wakes up and realizes it is living inside a controlled, fabricated economy. O&E that can collapse the moment the illusion fades.